Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Little, and for the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you the lobes of the brain and their function. The four lobes of a brain are actually part of a bunch of neurons that are all smushed together to kind of create one particular structure. And these four lobes have geographical markers that help us distinguish the four different lobes. Know that the four lobes actually sit on top of what we know as our brainstem, and this is what we call our neocortex. In other words, all the stuff that makes us more human lives out in this neocortex, where the stuff on the brainstem is more like heartbeat regulation and fight or flight. So overall, in this video, I'm going to tell you about the four lobes of their brain, the functions that they have, and what we might see if there was damage in those areas. The first lobe of the brain is called the frontal lobe, and it's located in the front part of the head, right behind the forehead. It's involved in some higher cognitive processes or our most human type thinking, including reasoning, problem solving, decision making, social appropriateness. If you're a fan of The Simpsons and you've seen Homer hit his head when he's done something dumb, don't. It's because he's literally trying to activate the part of his brain that helps him plan out things and to solve problems. We also see that the frontal lobe is an important part of our motor control, our movement and coordination, so that we can have functioning choice movement, whether or not we need to grab something or even walking. So coordinating that movement voluntarily is also located in the frontal lobe. We see language production happens in our frontal lobe in a space called Broca's area. And this area allows us to be able to produce meaningful speech. So damage here might result in someone who's unable to communicate the words that are stuck in their head. Finally, we see that the frontal lobe has some responsibility for our personality and our emotional management and regulation. So when we're figuring out how to respond, or more importantly, not respond in a situation, or how we go into things, that personality is stored here in the frontal lobe as well. When we have damage in the frontal lobe, we tend to see things like personality changes, or we see difficulty in executive function, which is things like making decisions or being on time and making plans. We also know that the frontal lobe has some responsibility for ADHD and the attention ability that comes with the ADHD. The second part of the second lobe that we'll talk about is the parietal lobe, and it's located in the upper middle part of the brain behind the frontal lobe. Its primary functions include sensory perception and pressing, such as touch and temperature and pain. And when you pinch something or feel something on a particular part of your body, there's a part of our brain, the somatosensory strip, that's part of the parietal lobe that detects that sensation. We also use the parietal lobe for spatial awareness and navigation, and also helps us understand what objects are, where they are, and more complex concepts such as numbers and shapes. In fact, most of our math is done right here, as well as spatial rotation. I remember a time when I was young and I was learning how to drive a car. I didn't even have my license yet. And I was backing out of a car space. And I didn't realize that you needed to back out and then turn because my spatial awareness hadn't been fully formed. So here I was backing out and I smashed a little into the car next to me. And all I remember is my poor dad running around with his hands on his parietal lobe saying, "Where are you going? Pay attention. Where are you in space?" So that's how I remember the parietal or parental lobe. The third lobe is the temporal lobe, and it's located on the sides of the brain near the ears. Its primary functions are auditory processing, sound and speech comprehension, specifically in an area called Wernicke's area. And this is the part of our brain that takes in the sound and is able to turn it into something meaningful, something comprehensible. Wernicke's area works with Broca's area in the frontal lobe to be able to do the whole language processing. And damage in this area oftentimes creates speech comprehension issues or aphasia. The temporal lobe is also responsible for memory formation. The hippocampus is involved in that, as well as emotional regulation. We see any kind of damage in this particular area oftentimes results in memory loss or speech comprehension issues known as aphasia. We also see epilepsy is an associated disorder in this temporal lobe. Our fourth and final lobe for this video is the occipital lobe, and it's located in the back of the brain. Its primary functions are visual processing, so it receives and interprets information that comes in through our retinas, travels down the optic nerve, crosses the optic chiasm, and hits into the occipital lobe. And we're able to recognize objects, colors, depth, motion. And that's really important, especially if you're on an escalator. When we see damage in this particular area, it's usually visual impairments, whether it's blindness or hallucinations. We also see difficulty recognizing objects, including a specific part of our brain that recognizes faces, the fusiform gyri. So if we have damage in that area, not only might you not be able to recognize other people's faces, you might not even recognize your own face. If you've ever taken a hit to the back of the head in your occipital lobe and you saw spots, you've seen the connection between this part of the brain and vision. That's the occipital lobe, and that's the four lobes overall. I've talked about where they're located in the brain, its primary functions of them, as well as what we would see with deficits in that particular lobe of the brain. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the brain as much as I do talking about the brain. See you next time.